A lot of people think that if they have high standards, it automatically means that they're showing up healthy in their relationships. And they don't necessarily see the issue with having really, really high standards. And I'm not here to say that there is an issue with having really, really high standards, but it's not always true that having them means that you're automatically healthy or that you will automatically have a healthy relationship, because high standards are not the same thing as healthy boundaries. And what a lot of people call standards is actually an attempt to control someone else's behavior so they feel safe inside of themselves. Now, let's just talk about this for a second. This goes for man or woman. I'm not here to point fingers or call anybody out. Just want to offer a fresh perspective here. If you ever meet someone that says, "I have high expectations. I never settle." Okay? But when you actually get close to them, there's no room for you to be human. There's no room to make mistakes. There's no compromising. The tiniest mistake or violation of their boundaries, aka their really high standards, one wrong move equals punishment, or they withdraw from you, or maybe they even cut you off, right? See, the thing with these types of people is there's a constant invisible test that you don't know that you're taking, but you'll know when you fail. Okay? And that isn't intimacy. That's being rigid. And it's a lot more common than people think. And I'm realizing this after some content that I've been posting on TikTok recently. And I think that part of the reason it gets so blurry is because we use the same words, we use the same language for two very different energies. And this is why words matter, but this is also why energy matters too, okay? Somebody can say, "I have boundaries," but what they actually mean is, "I need every single little thing to go my way or I'm out." Okay? And what I just said right there is kind of like the whole that's a result of a bigger problem that we're experiencing as a society, which is like death by bureaucracy. But that's totally separate. But that's like, anyways. I ADHD. It's at the end of my evening. I'm liable to go down a couple different rabbit holes. But let me just lock back in. Okay. Someone can say, "I have boundaries," but what they really mean is, "I need everything to go my way." What they really mean is, "I have a lot of unspoken expectations that I mistake for boundaries that I call having high standards." Okay, but then someone else can say, "I have standards," but what they actually mean is, "I don't really trust anybody, including myself, so I try really hard to control everything, and I don't even know that I'm doing it." Now, there's a helpful way that we can think about this, that we can break this down. And it's from developmental psychology. And I'm taking from this textbook right here, okay? But I want to break it down in really plain, simple language, because even though we're adults now, how we're raised usually sets the tone for how we show up in our relationships. That's where we learn relationships. Okay, so that's what we tend to model. Unless we spend a lot of time and intentional work and effort and therapy and coaching and so on and so forth to change that, we're more than likely going to show up based on what we learned. Now, there's kind of like four different lanes here, or four different styles. Okay, there's authoritative. Now, authoritative has high standards, but they're delivered with a high level of warmth. Authoritative is like, "I expect a lot, but I also support you through it, and I'm always with you." Okay. That's different from authoritarian. An authoritarian says, "I have really high standards, but I have very low warmth. In fact, I'm kind of detached. In fact, you better not mess up, or else." Okay. And then there's permissive. And permissive is when you have pretty low standards and you're also just very warm and loving. And this is, do whatever I want and I'm happy to go with it. Okay, which you can see how maybe that does not end well for that person when it comes to a relationship. Okay. And then there's the uninvolved. Okay. And uninvolved is just low standards, low warmth. That's just completely checked out. Okay. These are four parenting styles. Now, when you grow up with authoritarian energy, you essentially learn that love is conditional and that love is something that you have to earn, something that you have to perform for. And you're only safe when you're performing. That's what your body learns. Okay. And what it also learns is that any form of softness, any form of compromise or flexibility equals weakness. Okay. If that is your blueprint, you might find yourself repeating that same pattern in adulthood. And it doesn't make you a bad person. Whether you're the person who shows up that way at or to other people, or whether you're someone who is attracted to that, neither makes you a bad person. It just represents what's familiar and therefore what feels safest for you. Okay. But here's a layer that I think that our community doesn't really talk about enough. And it's that research shows those from lower socioeconomic backgrounds are more likely to lean towards authoritarian parenting. Okay. And there's a lot of cascading effects that stem from that style of parenting. And then when you take that and you show up that way in your relationships, you tend to have unhealthy relationship dynamics as well. Okay. And the thing is, if that's the type of parenting you had, or the type of parenting that you use right now, like, obviously it doesn't mean that you don't love your kids, but like, it just means that you really only know how to operate in like survival mode, in like controlling and demanding. Okay. If you're raising a child in an environment where one wrong move can lead to serious consequences, that strictness it has nothing to do with cruelty. It has everything to do with protection. And like, that's not a bad thing. But like, if that's what you were raised in, then you may have some unlearning to do, is really, I guess, what I'm trying to say. Okay. Because what keeps us safe in survival mode situations doesn't always help us thrive in intimacy and connection. And so that's what I mean by there's some unlearning here. Okay. Because when that survival wiring grows up, when you get a little bit older, it starts to look like my way or the highway. It starts to look like, if you really cared about me, you would just meet my XYZ standard. Okay. It looks like avoiding flexibility and, avoiding letting people be human because that feels unsafe. And you might not say that consciously, but that's what's going on beneath the surface. Now, for a lot of high achieving people, successful people, man or woman, right? All of what I'm talking about gets dressed up in really pretty language that sounds good on social media, right? And we call it, having high standards. We call it princess treatment. We call it knowing your worth. We call it being high value. We call it not settling. We call it protecting our peace. But what it often is protecting our nervous system from ever having to feel vulnerable. That's what's really going on. Now, I want to make something very clear here. I'm not saying that having high standards is the problem or even a problem. It's not what I'm saying at all. What I'm saying is, the problem is when those standards become rigid, when those standards are something that you use to punish other people. And, the problem is when those standards are disconnected from being emotionally attuned and warm with people. Now, boundaries say this matters to me and I'm willing to talk about it. Control, right? Authoritarianism says this matters to me, and if you don't act exactly how I need, then you're out. One clearly builds connection. The other clearly builds walls and is a reflection of all of the walls that somebody may have up. Okay. So here's a gut check. Here's a test that I want you to try. When you enforce this standard in dating, are you making space for the other person's humanity? Or are you demanding perfection? Are you protecting your peace? Or are you protecting your fear from being hurt again? And, whatever your answer is just shows you the opportunity for you that might be there. Now, this isn't about shaming anybody where they came from. I'm just saying that if you grew up in a home that is strict or controlling, it was probably about survival, not necessarily a lack of love, but part of healing as an adult, as a grown woman with a capital W, as a grown man with a capital man. The work is understanding the difference between what kept you safe and, what's actually keeping you stuck now. I think high standards are, they can be a beautiful thing, they can be a good thing. But if they're so rigid that nobody, including yourself, can really breathe inside of them, that's self protection disguised as strength. Okay. So I'm going to leave some questions to ask yourself in the description of this video. Let me know your thoughts. Curious to hear what you think. And my name is Sid Scott. I'll see you in the next one. Bye for now.